Steamtown, USA, now known as the Steamtown National Historic Site, has a pretty lengthy history, but a fairly good one, all things considered, when it comes to safety. Generally, when it comes to heritage railways, the notion of anything going terribly, horribly wrong, it's pretty rare. It doesn't happen that often. But it does happen. And in Steamtown's case, they have indeed suffered at least 2 fatal accidents. Though not tremendously recently, they have occurred, and much like the case with many rail accidents that involve the train hitting something that isn't another train, it was not the railroad's fault in any way. Hello, welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British rail critics, and of course my underwater train finders. You are the reason why this content remains tragic, actually. I really should stop being so, glib when it comes to these intros whenever I'm talking about sadder things, but that's just the way I am. And today, we are indeed going to discuss Steamtown, which is a fairly well-known heritage railway that started out as a private venture in North Walpole, New Hampshire, and then Bellows Falls, Vermont, until it was taken over by the National Park Service and moved to Scranton, Pennsylvania. Steamtown is still around, despite being a National Historic Site now, and they boast a tremendous amount of steam locomotives and various other pieces of historical rolling stock. But, naturally, when it comes to anything moving, accidents do happen, and at least 2 have plagued the history of Steamtown. This is the story of the fatal accidents of Steamtown, USA. The history of Steamtown can be traced back to one Francis Nelson Blount, who was an heir to the largest seafood processor in the United States. As a result, he had a lot of money, and he loved railroads, to the point that he acquired a whole bunch of different pieces of rolling stock, including a significant amount of steam engines. Eventually, he wanted to found his own heritage railway, as that was a thing that was going on, and he certainly had the money to do it, so he did it. He founded what he viewed as a museum, Steamtown, USA, but in 1961, he and his partners also founded the Monadnock Steamtown and Northern Railroad Amusement Corporation, specifically for running excursions. Over the years, they did that, but over time they started struggling with retention. They just weren't getting the audience they were hoping for, and it was causing them financial troubles. Had Blount stayed at the head, things might have been alright, but he was sadly killed when his private airplane actually collided with a tree during an emergency landing in Marlborough, New Hampshire on August 31st, 1967. From then on, most of the controlling stock in the company was transferred to Robert W. Adams, who was president of the Green Mountain Railroad, which Blount had also founded to assume freight duties on the former Rutland line between Bellows Falls and Rutland. They still did excursions. Eventually, they would move their operations to Vermont and then to Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is where they are now, but like I said, they are now under the control of the National Park Service, which to be fair is probably for the best, since they now have government funding to help keep this element of history alive. They've been under the control of the NPS since about 1995. But you want to know about the accidents. Steamtown has at least 2 fatal accidents, and yes, 2 that I am aware of. The first one happened on July 4th, 1985, and it involved one woman, Diane Richter, who was 23 years old at the time. She'd been drinking a lot that day, and somehow or another, she wound up either too close or on the tracks. I'll admit, sources were not clear as to the exact details of this particular accident. I don't even know which locomotive was involved in it, but either way, Diane was sadly killed. But the death was, of course, ruled accidental, as there was no way for the train to stop for her. Given her state at the time, being savagely drunk, she could have just ran right in front of the train without even thinking about it. I mean, it was the 4th of July after all, she was probably partying, and I get that. But guys, you gotta be careful around railroad tracks. That was the first case that I'm aware of something like this happening when it comes to Steamtown. The other one happened a little over 10 years later, on July 10th, 1995, less than a week after the National Park Service took over operations. This one I do have some details about. In this instance, it involved engine number 2317. She is a G3C, a 462 Pacific, built by the Montreal Locomotive Works, originally for the Canadian Pacific Railway. She'd been rebuilt in the late 70s and was still operating for Steamtown at the time, and she was pulling a 9-car excursion, carrying 572 passengers from Moscow to Scranton, going only about 20 miles per hour, which was pretty slow actually. The speed limit on that section of the line was 50, but they were taking it nice and easy for the excursion. However, what they didn't realize was that 2 young boys, Paul Paskert and Anthony Paskert, ages 12 and 16 respectively, had actually trespassed on the railroad's lines. They'd been out in the woods on their ATVs, and one of those ATVs got stuck on the tracks. 2317 was running backwards at the time, and that made it a lot harder for the crew, engineer Richard Roden and fireman Bob Patterson. Though truth be told, even if they had seen the kids, there was no way they were going to stop. Yeah, 2317 wasn't going very fast, but it was 9 cars. Even at the relatively slow 20 miles per hour, it was going to take them way too long to stop before striking the kids. And the kids were so focused on getting their ATV off the track, or perhaps unwilling to leave it behind, that they didn't even move. The corner they had crossed on was known as a blind corner, so they may not have noticed the train until it was way too late. And either way, 2317 hit and killed both of the boys. And the crew didn't even realize they'd hit anyone until they'd brought the train to a stop. They didn't hit the emergency brake because they thought they just hit an ATV or something. Certainly not a person, let alone 2 of them. Only when they got out did they realize the sheer horror of the situation. And naturally, the authorities were called, but at the end of the day, there was no blame to be thrown around, beyond the fact that the kids just shouldn't have been there. Even if the crew had slammed on the brakes immediately, they would not have stopped. There was literally nothing they could have done that would have averted what had happened. The crew would later say that the effect of what happened that day would never leave them, and they expressed sympathy to the families of the boys. They also mentioned that ATV riders were out there pretty often, and they had a habit of playing chicken with the trains every time they went by, which I can't stress this enough. Don't do that! This is what happens when you mess around with the trains, okay? The authorities saw it that way as well, and it was ruled as an accident. The kids were trespassing, and neither the crew or 2317 nor Steamtown were held liable for what had happened. It's just another sad lesson in railway safety. You can't just play on the tracks, and if this is the best case scenario, and they were really just trying to free their ATV, listen, everyone, kids, old, young, I don't care who you are. If you get a car, an ATV, a bike, I don't care what it is, it's stuck on the tracks and you can't get it out, leave it! You can replace whatever it is. You can't replace you, and the train won't stop. So please, I don't want to hear any more about dead kids, alright? And as I said, Steamtown is, of course, still around. You can visit it to this very day. As for 2317, she is currently sitting on static display. At the end of the 2009 operating season, she was only used sparingly as her flue time was close to expiring. She made her last run on September 5th, 2010. Currently, there are no plans to restore her to service, as, well, she's kind of in bad condition. She needs a lot of work done, and Steamtown just can't afford it at this point. So she'll probably sit on static display for quite a long time. And her only other accident was actually on October 27, 2003. This time her tender and 3 of the 9 passenger cars jumped the tracks, though no one was injured, as she was again going really slow at the time. So, yeah, at the end of the day, please, 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 don't play on the railroad tracks. I just don't want you to die. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders, some dude 267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Josh Johnson, Metal for Life Guy, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Brian, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, Hayden DeGrow, Master of None, Lord Hog 444, The Baxter, The Guy with a Beard, Mark Holding, Lock Kraken, Murder Drones Doll, A Person 723, DM Trouble Typhoon, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Alfonso Lapuche, Royal Hudson 2860, Icerfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matthew Wolf, Dr. Razor 78, Ohio Trucker 1, Mr. Sleepy, Matt Weaver, Alaric Jaspers, Tom Red Lion, and NS Productions 8104. Till next time, this is Darkness and I bid you all a fond farewell.